Is it working?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
we're good. All right, awesome. Rachel, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Not bad, as good as you can be right now.
It's a little dull, hey?
Just not much to do.
No, you look dapper.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Harry Potvin, and welcome back to another episode of the H Panel, the show where we bring on guests from all different backgrounds to talk mental health. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Rachel Nicol. Rachel is a Canadian Olympic swimmer, having competed in some of the top competitions around the world, including, but not limited to, the 2015 Toronto Pan Am Games, the 2016 Rio Olympics, the 2017 FINA World Champions in Budapest, and more recently the 2018 Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast, just to name a few. Specializing in the 50 and 100 breaststroke, she came third in the 100 breast and second in the 4x100 medley relay in Toronto, and fifth for 100 breast and fifth for 4x100 medley in Rio Olympics. A very full resume and track record for a very impressive athlete who will be having her eyes set for Tokyo 2021. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get too into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you grew up, your swimming background, stuff like that?
Sure. So I grew up, I was born and lived in Regina, Saskatchewan until I was 8 and started swimming there when I was 4 competitively. And so it's been a lot of years of competitive swimming. I'm sure when you're 4, though, they're not very good races. But anyways, we were there. And so we moved to Lethbridge with my dad's work when I was 8 and joined the LASC club here and swam here until I left for university when I was 18, and then I went to Texas to swim at SMU and was there for 4.5 years, and then moved back to Lethbridge to get ready for 2016. The timing of my degree and when Rio was worked out really well. I graduated in December, and so then moved back in January 2016 and just got ready for trials at that point for 3 months and didn't have any school, so that was really great.
Nice.
And did trials and then went to Rio 2016 later in August, and then I had no idea what I was doing with my life after that, so I stuck around in Lethbridge for another year and a half, I guess, and then I decided that I wanted to pursue more education and went and moved to Calgary for a master's degree in kinesiology, which I still have to complete. And I swam there not on the Dinos team, but with the Dinos in Mike-Blondell for about a year and a half. And then after that, I wasn't entirely sure after 2016 if I was going to go for another 4 years because I'm getting a little long in the tooth over here and getting a little old. So, but just with how things ended up happening, I wasn't super happy with how I did at Commonwealth Games and Pan Pacs. So I thought that I needed to finish on as good a note as I possibly could. So I moved back to Lethbridge summer of 2019. And have been here since and will continue to be here the plan was to retire after 2020, but now seeing as how things are, I'll be going on for another year, and then we'll have to move back to Calgary to finish the degree, but that's where we're at right now.
Love it. So I can't obviously relate to the Olympic scale of competitive swimming, but I know like when I have a big meet, like when we had provincials for universities in Ontario, like OUAs, I would remember like the week after was just like a super low period because it had been so high. What is the down period like after the Olympics?
It's a very interesting time because, and this happens with a lot of people, and you get kind of like the blues. I don't know how else to describe it. I've been working with a mental performance consultant, like a sports psychologist, since I was 14. The same one too. So it's been like I've got a lot of good things under my belt to help me mentally prepare for meets and games in life. But there's nothing that can really prepare you for the aftermath of an experience like that. And you're totally right. Like after a really big meet, especially when you do well, coming off of that high is you get just kind of like deflated, right? And that's exactly what it felt like. Was it was just, I just felt completely deflated. Not immediately after, but once I started training again, it was just like I just had no push, and not necessarily not motivation, because I felt like I was like, I want to train, and like I want to swim, and I want to feel good, but I definitely didn't.
Yeah.
And it just felt like I swear I put air into this balloon, and like I feel like I should have energy to do things, but I just didn't. And that lasted for, oh, I don't know, a few months at least. I would say maybe three or something like that, 3 or 4. My sports psychologist and I, we worked through that, and it's a very natural thing to come off of that. And I know lots of people who come off of the Olympics do feel that way. And so it was just a process. You had to kind of work through it day by day, and kind of just be super kind to yourself
Yeah.
and patient with yourself, as a lot of the cases, and just do the best that you could with what you had at the time. I went on some travel trips to Asia for a World Cup too, and that was quite hard. I'm glad that I did it, because I got a really cool experience, but it was hard to race as well. And like athletes, like, you want to race and like test their skills, and especially after Rio went really well for me, and so
Hmm.
there was no reason for me to feel not upset, but just kind of down. But I definitely did. So yeah, you just it just really needed some time, and needed some work, and just lots and lots and lots of patience. It was frustrating. I remember it being quite frustrating after a while, because it had been weeks and weeks, and it was still just the same kind of, taking a wet blanket and
Yeah.
placing it on top, and you're just kind of hanging out. Yeah.
Right. So, like, leading off of that, after you won gold in the 100 breast at the 2019 Canadian Swimming Championships, you had mentioned to like the interviewer that it had been a rough couple of years and you were trying to bounce back. So,
Mhm.
how were you able to, essentially gear your attention away from the negative and outlook on swimming and the negative opinions that you were having about your swim season, and focus it on a more positive outlook?
So that's a good question, because it's hard to do. Again, it takes a lot of time. And in that interview, I had moved back to Lethbridge and been training there for like a few months, and I felt mentally like very ready. Like I was like, I've done everything that I possibly can to get myself in a good place. And I was going in there feeling like I had made all these positive changes. And I was, back with my home coach that I was with, to get ready for Rio. I was back with my family. I didn't really like living in Calgary, so I was back in Lethbridge, and I liked Lethbridge. And all these positive things that I had kind of collected, to boost myself up and get ready for that meet. And then I still didn't perform well. And I think that it was just, I think, a little too ambitious for the time that was given. Like, I know 2 or 3 months sounds like a fair amount of time, but in the grand scheme of like a quadrennial of 4 years, it's really not that much time
Hmm.
to get settled. And like I say, with after Rio, I got kind of the Olympic blues for, like, I don't know, for 3 months. And so it takes a really long time to bounce back from like poor performances, and things like that. It can take quite a long time. If swimming has taught me anything, it's that patience is key. Sometimes you have to be really gentle with yourself, from myself anyways. And so I think that athletes can really, really be hard on themselves. They're their own best critic, I guess, if you want to say. And so that is good in terms of striving for perfection, and that trickles into other points of their lives, which can be good. But that also has some downfalls, in terms of nothing is ever good enough. And so then you kind of always feel like a little bit of a failure, which is sad to say, but it's true. This is sort of an off tangent to your question, but going into the Rio, I was 15th, and I got fifth. And to anybody looking on the outside, and myself included, like, I look at that and I'm like, wow, that's awesome,
Yeah.
right? And but I remember touching the wall in the final, and the first thing that I thought when I looked at the border, my first reaction was disappointment, because I was close to third. And it's like,
Right.
come on, like,
Yeah.
you got three best times. This went as good as you possibly could, and so and you're disappointed, like, okay. And so that's sort of what I mean, in terms of like, nothing's ever quite good enough, and that can really be a downfall if you don't check in with yourself and make sure, like, no, like, you're doing okay, and the things you do on a daily basis are really actually quite incredible. And so to bounce back from a lot of negative things. Again, I think it just takes a lot of time, a lot of talking to somebody that you really trust. And for me, that's, like having a good support system, like my parents, my brothers, some good friends, and then of course Charlene, my sports psychologist. Like, I practice daily gratitude and doing, like, just finding small things in the day that make me happy. And then at a point in time too, I was also writing at the end of the day things that made me proud, like things I was proud of myself for doing that day. And they can be like really small things, like you got out of bed today, or something like that, and went to morning practice or whatever. And so, but it's just something that you like, what, like just recognizing that it's like, yeah, like what we do is very hard, and it needs to be recognized that you're trying your best. And I think it's just doing that process day after day and setting really small goals, and like ones that are, there's something to be said about realistic goals. Like, everybody is thinking about, reaching for the stars, and like, and that's totally fine. That's really great, but those are very like far off goals. And for me, I'm more of like, hey, what am I going to do today and in this practice that I'm going to be happy about? And so really getting back to that, I practiced a lot of that when I was younger and 16, and like had a tough time with swimming and didn't really like it that much. And so kind of went back to that and doing those kinds of little things in practice. When I was in Calgary, I had torn my labrum in my shoulder and just wasn't performing well because of that. And there was a lot of confusion for me because I didn't know what was wrong for a really long time, and it wasn't getting any better. But once we figured that out, that really helped, and the diagnosis really helped, because then we could treat it and make it stronger. So that was good. And then I wasn't in as much pain. Then I was just not in a, like I said, I wasn't in a very good place in Calgary for a multitude of reasons. I was in school and had some very stressful situations and stressful people there, a particular relationship that was going on at that time, and an individual in my life. And Calgary, again, just like, like when it gets dark so early, and like it just wasn't great. And I was in a basement apartment and didn't get a lot of light, and so that was something. And then just not swimming well, lots of homework, not a lot of sleep, all these kinds of things just were not working for me. And so I made the decision to move back to Lethbridge so that I would be around my family. I had less of a workload. I wanted to focus on swimming, which I did, and I wanted to work with Peter, the coach here, which was very helpful. So I think I was going down kind of a dark path for a little while, but recognizing that and being like, no, this isn't okay, and making a change was as drastic as it was. And then all the other little small things was sort of the biggest things, I think, that really helped me to kind of turn it around. I guess I still am waiting for a really good performance because we didn't end up getting to compete in trials yet, but this year went a lot better than last year did, so I'm hopeful.
Yeah, that's awesome. And swimming is a lot of mental. It's like totally. 90% mental or whatever is what someone said. Like I know when I would go to a race and I was in the wrong headspace, like it's game over. I could be in the best shape of my life, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, and it's so undervalued. Like, anybody can work hard, anybody can push themselves, and that mental game can definitely make the difference, and the confidence that you can have, even just feeling happy. You know, like it doesn't even have to do with training. It's just, for me, if I'm not sort of on good terms with somebody, that can definitely filter into my swimming and end up causing bad performances because it's distracting or whatever. But yeah, for sure, definitely mental game has a big point to do with it.
Going back to Rio, before kind of Rio and like just before, there wasn't really like a big group of women in Canadian swimming that kind of did what you guys have done. And I know in 2019 it was coined that it was the golden age for Canadian women swimming. Like right now, how does it feel to be a part of, that movement for women swimming in Canada? Is there any pressure that comes with that, or is it just like a really good feeling?
For me, I would say it's mostly a good feeling. I think that there is some pressure that definitely comes with that, especially when we were in Rio, it was like a breakthrough, right? And so now it's going to be everything compared to that. And that's hard. Like, comparing yourself to other people is hard enough, let alone comparing yourself to yourself.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that it is a good feeling. And at Rio, it was incredible because the first medal that we won, it was kind of like this realization of like, oh, we can do that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Once somebody does something, then it's like all these other people are kind of like, it's a realization of like, yeah, we can do that. And then everybody kind of follows suit. So it definitely, like, you hear that a lot of like, it got the momentum and things rolling, and it totally did. And that was really, really cool to be a part of. And I'm really glad that I was as old as I am. Like, I was 23 when I was at Rio. And so I definitely tried to look at it big picture, because I definitely get caught up in like all the little things going on, and then before I know it, that everything's over. And so I really tried to take a minute of being like, wow, that like you are part of really like an historical moment, and recognize that. And so it's definitely really cool. I don't train at like a high performance center or anything like that. Like, I really like kind of being in Lethbridge, in a tiny town, not having all like the bells and whistles kind of around with being at a center. And I know that doesn't work for, and being in like a club team and stuff like that doesn't really work for a lot of people. And being at a high performance center definitely has the mentality of, this is what we're striving for, these are our goals, everything is kind of geared towards that with it, which is great. But that's never been my mo. And so I really like more of the kind of holistic approach and family feel towards it, I guess.
Yeah.
And having like, swimming is something to me, definitely, but it's not everything. And so I think that that has helped take some of the pressure off. I definitely have been putting pressure on myself, and I didn't realize until I swam a meet in this last December how much pressure I was putting on myself for the 2020 trials, until a race that I had. And what athletes do sometimes is they'll be putting so much pressure on themselves that they'll kind of transfer it to other people, even though those people aren't actually putting pressure on themselves. Like, there's a short course season and a long course season.
Yeah.
And so this was our sort of my big short course meet. And I swam my 100 breaststroke, and it did not go how I planned it to go. And my response after that was so emotionally strong. And I didn't realize, because then I felt at the time like I was letting my coach down, I was letting my parents down, I was letting everybody else down. They're just doing their thing, and like it's their choice to want to support me. But it was just all this pressure that I was putting on myself, that I was just placing kind of on these other people that weren't pressuring me at all. And I'm really glad that I went through that at the time, because now I know that and can kind of deal with that. And so I think that everybody works differently, and I have found sort of a little bubble of a place that works really well for me, in terms of it being like quite a calm and fun and chill atmosphere, and very family oriented, with having, swimming on a club team that have kids who are 5 all the way up to 18. And then we also have the pronghorn team, which is really fun, the university team. And so it's a really good mix for me, instead of high performance centers have just lots of people who are just there for swimming, and that's what they want to do, and their whole sort of mentality is geared towards that. And that does work for a lot of people, and has proven to have success for
Yeah.
sure. But it doesn't work for me, and so I can't really speak towards how other people deal with it. But that's kind of how I deal with it, is just being grounded, and bringing things back to the roots, and just breaking it back down, and not getting too far ahead of yourself, and trying really hard not to freak out and think about too far in the future. But it's definitely super cool to be a part of a team that is doing as well as it is, because then the possibilities are endless for what we can do. And I really hope that the success continues, and hopefully like our men's team can get moving up there, because I think we're all like learning and pulling each other up. So I'm excited for 2021 to, if I go or not, I'm excited to see what happens no matter what. So
Yeah, it's gonna be really fun to watch. I was really hoping it would be this summer, because I was
I know.
pumped for you guys. It also helps that Canada's a decently young team for swimming,
Yeah.
which makes it that much more exciting.
Yeah, super young. Yeah.
So, obviously with coronavirus and this pandemic that's going on, like everything's been shut down. Like no big meets this summer, Olympics being pushed back. So how does that affect your training and your everyday life? And then currently, like how are you able to stay in shape during this pandemic?
It's changed everything completely. Like, my whole life revolved around sort of going to the university, because I was taking some classes there, and then swimming, and then the weight room is there, and that's completely been taken away from me. So Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would be kidding anybody to say that I'm not losing fitness. I can't imagine that anybody is who's a swimmer anyways is maintaining the same fitness level that they did when they had access to a pool, because that's near impossible. When the whole thing started, I guess, and the trials were postponed slash canceled, and then the Olympics was later. It at the time I was sort of just like, oh, like okay, like I kind of because of how it happened, you could kind of see it coming, and so I wasn't too worked up about it, and it was just like, yeah, okay, like whatever, it is what it is. It's completely out of our control. I'm just gonna do what I can, and it's kind of nice because then I can get a lot more sleep, and I can, all these new things. I can do things that were on the back burner and get them done. I can try new workouts, all these things, right, that everybody probably ended up doing too. But now that it's been, I don't know, 4 weeks, there's been a bit of a shift. And when Olympic trials, sort of the week that we were supposed to have Olympic trials, felt really weird to me because like I would have swum on, I think, day 2 of the meet or something like that. So I was done pretty early in the week, and that was only a few weeks ago. And I wasn't sleeping well that entire week, and I just felt quite unsettled and continued to feel unsettled into last week and this weekend, and just the feeling of like being kind of robbed of a performance and robbed of an experience because of all the hard work that we put in. And it wasn't for nothing. Like I said, swimming is something to me, and I want to perform well and everything, but it's not everything. Sorry, there's my cat.
No, that's okay.
But it was, yeah, just feeling, I guess, some grief and loss, and I didn't really realize that until I talked about it, that I was actually feeling quite sad as of late about not being able to do that. Luckily for me, I still can do that in a year, but I have no idea if I'm going to be in the same place. So, like, I felt really ready to go, and I
Yeah.
have no idea if that's going to be the same. Like, anything could happen in a year. And so it just is feeling, yeah, sad about that. And so, yeah, we're just trying to deal with that right now. And I'm just kind of allowing myself to feel sad, because there's no point kind of honeycoating it and being like, no, everything's fine. Like, it was like,
Yeah.
no, I put a lot of work in. I moved my entire life, like, and you were building up mentally and physically for this climax that never ended up happening. And so it was just like nothing happened, and you're just cool. Like, great. It's been an interesting sort of fluctuate of emotions, I guess, in the last 4 weeks, because I was feeling totally fine, and then now things, I'm feeling a little unsettled. The longest break I've ever taken, I think, is 7 weeks, and this is going on longer than that, and so
Yeah.
that's making me a little like anxious. No idea when we're gonna get back in the pool, and it's like, will I be able to feel the same way? Like, will I know how to swim, kind of thing. So just trying not to focus too much on that. But yeah, right now we're doing Zoom classes every day with my club team and doing some workouts which are led by Peter, the coach. And so those are really good, because in terms of athletes, like, I'm not a good person to like be like, I'm gonna work out on my own.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that.
Right.
So so it's good to have some schedule and have something in place for that. And so we're doing that, and it's just kind of a mix of different things, because everybody's got different equipment right now, and going out for lots of walks like everybody is. I can't run. My body does not respond well to running whatsoever. So no running. But if I could, I would. And then I'm gonna try to get a stationary bike and do a little bit of biking. But that's basically it. Like, I'm really trying not to bite off more than I can chew at this point,
Yeah.
because I do feel the way that I do, and I'm kind of sad. And so I don't want to bombard myself with like, you should feel like you should be doing so much productive stuff because you have time now. But it's like, no, like, if you just do like one or two things, and that's cool, and like, don't be a lump on the log all day long, for days and days on end. But
Right.
yeah, so just again, just being like kind and patient, and just kind of going with the flow of these emotions, and recognizing them, because I didn't really realize I was sad about it until like yesterday.
You
And
you have to go with the flow, but it's kind of hard because no one's been in this situation before, right? So like,
totally.
there's no like definite, oh, we're gonna be done at this time.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know about you, but like for me personally, like I like knowing what's going on and I like seeing the end. So
Yeah.
like, not is so stressful.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's totally uncertain, Like, and I'm the same. I like structure, and I don't like not knowing what's going on, and I don't like not having a definitive date of like we're gonna get back in the pool, because I like counting down things and being like, okay, only a few weeks left or days or whatever, and like now it's forever at this point that we know of. So yeah, it'll eventually stop. But it's the same. We have no idea when. So it's the longer it goes on, the more kind of unsettled I've been feeling as well.
So those are all my questions. So we're just going to get into the viewer questions now.
Really?
So the first one I've got is swimming gives you hours and hours to think by yourself when you're training and when you're racing. It's kind of just you in the pool. How do you think this personally affects mental health in swimmers?
That's a really good question. It definitely leaves you a lot of time with your thoughts. That's for sure. I'm a sprinter, so it's kind of nice. Like I see distance swimmers workouts, and I'm like,
Oh,
how do you do that? So I don't know how they manage that. I'm not sure. You have to ask somebody else, but that's incredible. Yeah, it can be a little bit not dangerous, but it's like you really have to know yourself, because it is very quiet and you're there all on your own and just thinking to yourself. I'm really glad that my parents got me involved with a professional on the mental health side when I was young, because things were already sort of crumbling at the seams at that point in time. And so I think for me, anyways, I'm very grateful that I have had somebody to work with and give me things to think about while I'm in the pool. And I'll give clinics to young kids and stuff like that with breaststroke or whatever, and they'll ask me like how to stay focused and stuff like that. And I'm like, I know that it's like you want to think about technical aspects. For me, anyways, I'm in usually so much pain that I'm just thinking about like one specific technical aspect or maybe two, but that's kind of it. So at those points in times, it's more of, I guess, almost like an animalistic, like just survival at that point. And so that's hard to keep yourself going. But when you're just doing meter after meter after meter and it's really dull, I have a coach now that always gives us something to think about, and not too much, because I know that there's coaches too that overcoach and give you like 10 things to think about while you're in the pool, and that can be also a very negative thing, because then you're constantly talking to yourself and it's super annoying, and you're like, just quiet down. There's nothing else to distract you but yourself. It can get a little bit maddening sometimes, and I've had that side of the coin as well. But right now, Peter does a very, very good job of giving us just a few technical things that he wants us to focus on while we're swimming. That really helps for me, anyways, with boredom and just having something to think about. And it's nice when somebody gives you something to think about instead of you trying to come up with it, because then you can kind of get chattery in your head again. I think for some people it can have a big impact, because you can kind of get caught up in your own little world. And like if you just sit in a room by yourself, like for lots of people that can be detrimental, because they start questioning themselves and what they're doing and why they're doing it or whatever, and get lost in sort of this cascade of questions. What helps me, anyways, is having some little things to think about. And then in warm ups and stuff like that, I don't know. For me, we kind of play around in warm ups and we'll get it done. But you got your friends in there too, and so it's really helpful to have good friends to be able to talk to. And if you're doing a boring set, you can just say that and be like, "Yo, this is really boring," and then maybe you can come up with a game at the end of each wall or whatever. And I know that people do that too, and I do that just to have a little bit of fun, because it's supposed to be fun, right? And swimmers can be very introspective people because of that. Has good things with it, but it can also have bad things with it. And so I think that if anybody feels like they have issues with being alone with their thoughts, that they definitely should talk to somebody about that. And that really, really helped me. I would get like so upset in practices and just beat myself up and start crying, and then not be able to finish because you're hyperventilating and all of this, and being super hard on yourself. And if something goes wrong in a set, being able to bounce back from that can be really hard, because you're already like your adrenaline's going and your emotional response can be heightened. And so it can be really hard managing yourself in the pool. There are tools that I use to kind of help with that, and for everybody, I'm sure that is different. I don't think you should wait till something goes wrong for you to go and find help. There's nothing wrong with talking to somebody, even if things are going pretty good and I just was curious about this and wanted to talk to you about it. Like that's a good thing to do too. And I think that has helped me from a young age to now. Yeah, you can definitely get caught up in your own thoughts and in your head, and it can be a good thing, and then it can also be a bad thing.
Going back to, you were talking about how you like go and give clinics to these young swimmers, like these local swimmers, and then you also go and give talks to local swimmers as well, I saw. What's one big piece of advice that you give to these young swimmers when you're doing these speeches?
Oh, one big piece of advice. For me, I always preach having other things in your life to kind of have perspective that swimming isn't everything. It's important, and I know people want to do well, and that's totally great. But just know that you're not just a swimmer. For me, like you're a daughter, a sister, cat mom, like and you have a lot of really other good qualities and traits. I think that athletes get kind of not stuck, but like they're in their world, right? And it kind of gets overshadowed the fact that, and this can apply to any athlete, what they deem as normal is not normal to the general public, right? And so they do incredible things, in the workouts that they do and the mental fortitude that it takes to do those workouts really is quite extraordinary. And I think that that is a lot of the times lost. I don't think that swimmers really realize how hard swimming is. Like, of course, it's hard, but I don't think people recognize that. Like, lots of people don't willingly choose to put themselves in pain. That's kind of a weird thing
Yeah.
for a human to be like, yeah, sure, I'll go and put myself through agony every day. That's really important, is to just realize like what you do every day is really quite extraordinary. And again, with the comparing, there's always somebody better, right? Like you're always comparing yourself to Michael Phelps or whoever it might be. And they're like, well, I did this, but this person's way faster. So it's really not that good. Recognize your achievements, be happy about reaching little goals that you've set, and actually be happy about them. That's the main thing I would preach, is just like you're more than a swimmer. The things you do every day are really quite incredible, and don't lose sight of that. Make sure that you have some good friends in your corner to push you through that, because it's nice to know that other people are going through the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great advice. And then finally, the last question, I'm speaking as this person right now. Something I deal with is putting the needs of teammates and friends before my own. How do you do both successfully without letting one slip?
Totally. I struggle with that as well. I really am like a people pleaser.
Yeah.
And that can be a downfall, because you get yourself in situations that you're like, I don't really want to do this, but if I had just said no, I wouldn't be here. It takes some trial and error of knowing when to say yes and when to say no. Like I like taking in baking to like the club or whatever, and so when I feel like up for it, then I'll do something nice, but only when I feel like I have the time and the energy to do that. So I think it's definitely an interesting case as well, because doing things for other people makes you feel good, right? But then that can end up wearing you out, because if you do too much for other people, you're not doing enough for yourself. So I think it's very, very important to recognize that you do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you're doing all these things for other people to make you feel good, but you need to be able to feel good on your own. I think it's good to recognize that, and that again, it's just kind of knowing that it's okay to say no, and it's okay to say yes, but just make sure that you're not being selfish, you're not being self-absorbed. You really matter as well. If you give yourself a scenario where like you say yes to doing some volunteer work or something like that the night before a swim meet or something, and you just say yes because that's what you do, and it's kind of ingrained that you don't say no, and then your performance suffers the next weekend because you didn't get enough sleep or something like that, and then you feel bad about that. If you want to help your teammates, that's really great, but just think a little further down the road and think, okay, can this negatively impact me in a major way, or in a way that will make me quite upset a little further down the road? Because you can get some short-term payment, but then later on it can really end up snowballing and having negative effects. Maybe not saying yes to things right away and just being like, I'll get back to you on that, like let me think about it. And I do that a lot, like just taking like a day or something like that, or a few hours, just to think like, do I really want to do this? No, I want to help people, but if it's at quite a cost to yourself, it's not really worth it sometimes, especially if you feel run down and you don't have the energy and you're not in the best place. Then I would definitely say don't hesitate to say no to things. After all, you are the most important person to yourself. As much as you want to help other people, those people also need to do things for themselves too. And if they're always relying on you and your teammates are always relying on you to make them happy or make them feel good, then that's not good for them either. So for me, it's taken a lot of trial and error and still working on it to this day, but just taking a moment and balancing that out and weighing the pros and cons to it, I guess, and taking your time and not immediately agreeing to everything. And of course, in practice, it's really great to be there for your teammates and cheer them on. But if you need to be in the zone and like focus, then just don't feel bad about not talking to people and like just focusing on yourself. That's totally fine too. You're in quite a stressful situation, so it's totally fine to do that too. You can be a good teammate as well as be good to yourself. It's a delicate kind of balance, but it's totally okay to say no to things. That's totally fine.
Love it. So that's everything I've got for you, Rachel. Before, we wrap things up, I usually let the guests kind of have like a 30-second little plug for anything they're doing. If you have anything you want the viewers to know about, now is your time.
Oh, I never even thought about that. I would just say maybe everybody stay safe and stay home. Just know that everybody's struggling right now. It's a hard time for everyone, athletes included. I know that lots of time there's sort of the role models in communities and stuff like that, but it's hard for athletes right now too, and I think that that's a good thing for people to know, that it's not easy for anyone right now, and it's really good to, again, like take care of yourself and not necessarily always be doing things for other people and really feeling that you need to be ambitious with stuff. It's okay to take time for yourself and do things that you want to do instead of doing lots of stuff for other people. It's great to serve the community, but do that at your own pace. You don't always have to be doing stuff for other people. Take care of yourselves first, definitely, and your families. Yeah.
And with that concludes this episode of the H Panel. Rachel, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This is great.
And for all my viewers, I will see you guys next week. Thank you for watching another episode of the H Panel. I really appreciate you guys. For more episodes of the H Panel, click this button right here. And if you want to subscribe for more videos from myself, subscribe is right down below. Thanks, guys.